welcome to the Musky Shop TV Next Level Musky Fishing video. We're going to cover a lot of things in this video, but first it's really important that we talk about seasonality and then we start talking about structure. So we're going to start here at the maps and work our way through the store and talk about the seasonality of musky fishing. It's important to realize that spring is an entirely different endeavor than fishing in the winter for these critters. So thinking about seasonal presentations, here we have the figure 8, the mini boss. We have Steve's meat grinder. These are going to be versatile presentations that are going to get you in the game in the early part of the year. Say we're fishing during the spring, we want a downsized presentation. Muskies are generally going to be shallow post-spawn, recovering from the biggest endeavor they go through each year. That life cycle will drive them into the warmer parts of the lake. Typically in the north woods, it's a pretty safe bet. The north end of the lake is going to be where you want to target these critters. We look at this classic presentation for early season, rattle traps. Small presentations. You're going to have to be cognizant of it's not all about speed early in the season. So you can burn them like a rattle trap, but slow rolling a meat grinder or a presentation like that is going to get you in the game. Now, up north, the joke's always been, you can throw top water as long as it doesn't bounce, meaning as long as there's not ice on the lake, you can throw top water. So even some of these flat tail presentations from Bomb Squad, things of that nature. But when I really think about early spring presentations, I start thinking about some of the booker baits. We got a willow 10-buck here. What a classic presentation. Small body. We'll talk about that when we get into bucktails, but this is a small body presentation for early season. These fish are recuperating after doing the toughest thing they do during their life cycle, which is the spawn. They're going to eat a lot of small things. They're just, they're not going to go after a 12-inch sucker in general. They're going to be looking for small targets that help them recuperate throughout the entire season. Perennial favorite of mine, you have some of the slop master presentations. I don't think you can go wrong with the small 5-blade 10-bucks. These are going to be exceptional presentation for your early spring fishing. Downsize, downsize, downsize. Something to consider when we're talking about early season is downsizing from downsized, right? So sometimes you might have to reach into what I call the muskie box, some bass tackle or small presentations. If you're getting follows on these classic favorites, say like the Joe Book or Shallow Raider, if they're following these, we might need to go even smaller. So there's a few options in that game. A small presentation, slightly smaller, is the Fatty Minnow from Slammer. These are going to be great spring presentations. Now, if you're not really fishing early in the season, these are still handy to have because they give you a cast back lure for followers when we need to downsize. We get into some of the even smaller presentations, like I said, from Slammer, 3-4 inch bodies here. These are things I'm thinking spring seasonality. Now, as we creep on, things get warmed up, muskies start recuperating from the spawn, we're going to be able to get into some bigger presentations. That's when I really start focusing heavily on blades. So we come here, showgirls, cowgirls, your classic presentations. Now, I'm not going to start the first couple warm weeks of the year by throwing double 10s or a 9. Let's focus still. Let's move up from that Booker 500 blade and let's move into 700s. Let's move into double 8s. They're going to be very productive as we increase from the spawn. Things get warmer, things get more summery. Once we're in the throes of summer, people are thinking about summer vacations and musky fishing starting to get hot. We can really move into those big baits. You have the electric bunny here. You have your junior, your double 9s, you have your stagger blades, a lot of presentations here. The classic cowgirl perennial favorite. You're going to be in the game with big presentations in the peak of summer. Can't say enough about dive and rise during this period of the year because it's going to be crucial that you get probative with weed beds. You get probative with shoreline cover and structure, which we'll cover the differences of here shortly. But the Titan dive and rise baits, making contact with these weeds and drawing these fish up as we come into these summer months is going to be important. Early in the season, though, if we are in the spring, the Titan Junior can be a pretty positive impact for your musky fishing game for downsized presentation. So thinking blades when I get into the summer months is definitely going to be probably the core of most anglers' game is going to be blades. But there's some other presentations and tactics and techniques we need to be aware of that are going to help us be successful during these summer months. And that really starts getting into big rubber. Okay, so we're going to cover some of the things like my friends here at Toothy Tough Tackle. We're getting into baits that are this, overall body size is pretty large, but the main target here, 8, 10-inch bodies, okay? Your classic baits like the Medusa and Poseidon, these swim bait presentations, these big rubber presentations really start shining as we get later in the summer. Muskies are looking for a pretty good meal. Now you go, why are muskies finicky? Why are they hard to catch? I don't believe it's lack of population per se. If they're eating once, maybe twice in some cycle, they're eating one large meal and they're sitting there and taking those calories in and not doing much, right? So it's a big lazy fish. If muskies were on the move, if they're like northern pike and hyper aggressive, they'd be the easiest fish to catch. Muskies typically eat one big meal and they'll go set, and that's really true in the summer months. So we have to think about baits that are going to have an impact, and they're going to have that large profile. So that's why it gets so wild with some of these size baits when we talk about the large, here's Medusas, and we have larger standard. We'll show how to retrieve this here in a moment. As well, your tube presentation are going to be impactful in the summer. Muskies, once we come out of that spring, that post spawn, that's their shallower presentation right there, where the muskies are coming up into the shallows. And as the year progresses on, they're going to follow cover and structure to deeper water. So baits like the Kraken, baits like red October tubes, where we can get down consistently in that 5, 6, 7 foot zone, is going to help increase your odds. Now, a lot can be said about summer fishing where everything's on the table, and it really is. There's a lot of options here during the summer months for presentations. A little bit everything's going to work. We talk about crankbaits, and having a crankbait like a shallow invader or shallow red that's an upsized presentation during the summer months is going to be pretty advantageous for your game, because these fish are active. They're looking for prey on a regular basis. So the feeding windows might be increased. They might do one big meal, they might do a couple big meals, but no matter what, when we get into this season, the seasonality, when we get into summer months, muskies can get a little finicky when we end up getting into tough weather conditions and things of that nature. So we're going to talk about glide baits in this video. 6-inch hellhound. You can't go wrong with this bait. Sometimes we see these peak weathers, it's a wonderful summer day, and you're going, wow, the water's 72 degrees, but we had post-frontal conditions. Weird things happen. You need to get your finesse game going during the summer months every so often, because when fronts come through, they move through, they can really turn off muskies that are in their shallow water bites. So finesse presentation is something we got to look at and have in our tackle box, whether it be a hellhound, whether it be a phantom, a presentation that's going to help you overcome tough conditions. So back to the seasonality of the matter. Spring being the time that they're the most shallow. They're in there recuperating from the spawn. They're eating small things. We start moving out. We start moving out to deeper water. Muskies might come in shallow in the mornings and might come in the evenings, right? That presents us with some really, really exciting options in the topwater game, where we're able to target the fish in probably the most exciting way possible, which is getting them to watch them come up and blast the lure. So, we look at these presentations. We'll talk a little bit about topwater here, like Lake Axe, what a great bait, all the way up to just the big monster baits. Muskies will come up and crush these in the summer. Now, one thing I want to say in regards to the seasonality and a strategic game plan would be, you can't go out and rely on, say, like your spanky baits. You can't just huck and chuck these blades all day long and expect to get monster follows from sun up to sundown. There's days, and every dog has their day, but you're going to have to branch out. So don't throw blades in topwater all day long. It's going to be imperative that you focus your energy on shallow bites in the morning, right? Because muskies will move in shallow in the morning, or shallower edges, and they'll move out during the day, and this cycle takes place. We'll cover structure and how they make those movements, what's going on with forage fish here in a moment, but you need to have versatility. So when you're thinking about seasonality, summer, your game plan, yes, topwater, bucktails, they're going to get the job done, but you can't rely on them solely. So we need to mix things up. What great way of mixing things up on a long fishing day is trolling. How can you go wrong there? So we're going to talk a little bit about some trolling tactics. I'm right here by the Supernatural baits, man. I love Duff stuff, and it doesn't get better than these. So adding a little trolling into your musky game is going to help you increase your odds. It's a great way to, again, break up the day and target fish as they move out during the morning. They move out to deeper water in the summer months. You can target some of these suspended or off break line fish during the midday when you're not going to get the action on the buck, because you're not going to get the top water. You got to think strategically out through the course of the day. So we'll cover some of the tactics and tips to get you going during summer months. Now, fall time fishing. Wow, what an exciting period. You know, we get into the classic sucker fishing. People will be focused on fishing deep edges and fishing for muskies that are on, you know, old weeds and things of that nature. We're going on a hog hunt. If you're fishing in that cold weather period, that cold water period, you're gonna need to throw some big baits, and it gets pretty serious this time of year. Presentations like your mag dogs and your pounders, if you've never thrown these before, they can be a little bit shocking when you first see them, but the whole point is shock and awe. A lot of times it takes a massive presentation to get a cold weather muskie's attention. So big presentations, and using them appropriately on deep edges in the early fall is going to be a great way to complement your sucker game. If you're fishing live suckers, there's a lot of options there. Like we said, the pounders from Innovations. Targeting these fish that time of year, like I said, is going to take a little bit of strategy on the end of the season, from a seasonality standpoint, of moving out deeper. These fish that have been shallow all year long or on deep weed edges, those weeds start to deteriorate when we get into colder water periods. At that moment, these fish start moving a little further out and a little further out. They're staging deeper, and the reason being is we've lost stability in the shallows. So during the summer months, you pretty much have cool nights, warm days. You have relatively stable temperatures there. At this point, and we're not going to cover so much on turnover, but turnover can start happening during this period where fish are forced off these edges. You got to fish big, and you got to fish deep. So more so than anything, whether it be, regardless of what presentations you want to use, the most important thing in muskie fishing is knowing where to target muskies. So how do we find actively feeding muskies? We're going to bop over to the map section and look at some structure options and some tips and some pinpoint strategies to get you dialed in on new waters or find new places on the water you already fish. How do we find muskies, right? You pick up a map book, or you're looking on your phone, or you're looking on the graph of your boat, and you know, here's just a body of water. I'm just at random. You know, you look at this, and there's elements in this that are telling you where actively feeding muskies should be found. It just takes a little bit of thought process, a little bit of work to figure out what we're looking at. You know, on most maps, you're going to see a lot of break lines, right? Well, what is a break line? Squiggles. Here's some squiggles. Okay, what does that tell us as someone looking at this? What does it mean? Well, break lines are a human construct. They're not there. I talk about in my book, Next Level Musky Fishing. Break lines don't exist in a fish's world is the way that we display them. What we're seeing or what we're showing in a break line is a depth change, right? So as far as map interpretation, these lines and the space between them denote how gradual, right? Here's a gradual break. This space here to here is pretty wide. So it's a gradual break line. To tighter elements, here's 5, 10, 15. It might show on camera, it might not, but these are slightly tighter, meaning it's more plunging. It's a quicker transition, okay? So when they're making maps, they use a process or the element of bathymetry. It's how you denote all of this scientific funsy stuff. But for anglers, it just means we have break line charts, and they outline what's happening with a body of water, the features and structures. We can use these elements to dial in on muskies based on seasonality. So if we understand that muskies are going to be shallow in the early season, by reading our map, we can look at these shallow zones. Now, I stole this from my good friend Joe Bucher. It's a great concept. I don't care if you're using a paper map or electronics or your phone or whatever it is. Highlight what's called the littoral zone. The littoral zone is the shallow zone where vegetation grows in lakes. That's usually 12 to 0, somewhere in that neighborhood. So if we highlight that on a map or on our electronics on our boat, that's going to reveal the shallow zone where muskie will be found post spawn, and where they're going to be found in the summer months when they're feeding in shallow zones. Now, just because we've highlighted, if you will, the littoral zone, that doesn't mean that muskies are going to be on every inch of that. We start delving deeper into the structural elements of a body of water. I'll just bop over here. You know, this lake, never been there, but I can tell you right now, we have a creek coming in, we have a flow coming out, right? So maybe in the spring, and theoretically on this tiny little bean lake I'm looking at here, maybe this water is slightly warmer in this zone, so muskies might tend to be here in a vegetative zone post-spawn, or maybe they're going to be up here. We need to look at contours, cover, and structure to understand where they're going to be. Now, map interpretation will help us get there quickly in some capacity by highlighting the littoral zone and then studying these maps. So, you know, on the same page, here's a lake. Again, never been there. We obviously have a hump, a reef kind of system here. We have 2 feet at the top, 16. Study your maps and look for interesting features. Most of the time, muskies are going to be found in an area that has something of interest. Now, my rule of thumb with structure, without delving too deep, is going to be access to deep water. Regardless of seasonality, muskies want a shallow feeding zone and a deep water refuge. In the early, part of the year, they will still make migrations, daily movements from deep to shallow. Especially holds true in the summer months. Muskies were not going to spend their entire day in the cabbage. You might think they're there. Why are we not contacting fish in the middle of the day? Well, those fish have moved out of that cabbage after the morning, and they might be suspended, they might be off a deeper break. So studying a map next to areas you already know that hold muskies will reveal the structural elements they're using as they make this movement. Now, deep and shallow are relative terms. I've seen bodies of water that top out, the deepest that they are is 15 feet. Well, that's deep. Bodies of water that are 150 feet, that's deep, right? It's relative to the body of water. So you have to take each map study that you do, each time you're looking for structural elements to put you in the right place. Relativity, okay? So 30-foot hold, a 5-foot transition. I'll say this when it comes to structure fishing and map interpretation. It's really a matter of pattern recognition. I'm just flipping pages. Spooner Lake. Never been there either, but, I'm looking at Spooner Lake here. Okay? Obvious things that come out. Oh, there's islands. Wonderful. There's little islands here and things of this nature, but, this looks interesting. Here's a weedy area in a 10-foot hole. When this lake might not even have muskies in it, but theoretically, let's say it does, tops out at 10 foot. Well, here's the deep hole. Here's deep hole. So what cover and structure are adjacent to the deep water? That's going to allow muskies to seek refuge. I think a conversation could be had about contacting muskies in cold fronts, which is a matter of slowing down. A lot of people struggle in cold fronts because they're not going deep enough. They're not hitting target areas that are deeper than just that shallow littoral zone that we're so apt to fish because we've had success there previously. So yeah, we've caught fish out of the weeds for the last 2 days, but a cold front comes through. We need to make a transition. We need to go to deeper edges. We need to be more probative and look for structure and deeper cover where muskies are going to take refuge when things go bad. The importance of understanding structure is to help you on days when it's just not clicking. We all pray for that hot topwater or bucktail bite. That's what I want most days. However, we're all going to struggle on the water. Having a deeper knowledge of structure and how it ties together, like I said, it becomes a matter of pattern recognition. You look at a lake, you see those same elements. It just keeps repeating itself. Muskies are going to use shallow feeding zones next to deep water refuges. Start looking for that in your map work. Think a little bit seasonality, and it'll get a little bit more dialed in. If you want to take a deeper dive into structure fishing and the concepts of that, you can check out my book, Next Level Musky Fishing, available at the Musky Shop. But if you want to just put your toe in it, start looking for shallow zones next to deep water refuges. Look for incoming water. Anything that looks interesting to you on the map, chances are a big muskie is going to be using it. Big rubber baits really seem to be a unique facet of muskie fishing. These have been around probably the shortest time of any category of bait in muskie fishing. I would say we're a little bit past the 20-year mark of big rubber really being popularized, but it's a different kind of presentation than say your bass fishing or anything of that nature. There's a lot to choose from. This is an Alpha Dog, which is exclusive to the Musky Shop. We have our classic Medusas here. Great presentation. Really cool custom baits from Toothy Tough. Then we get into variations where we have, the Red October tube. And then you have a hybrid bait like the Kraken from Livingston. So there's a lot of stuff going on in big rubber. How do we narrow the field? How do we know what we need to throw? When's the appropriate time for a bulldog? When's the appropriate time for a Medusa? When do we throw tubes and how do we work them is what we're going to cover. One thing we should quickly add in. A lot of these big rubber presentations come in shallow variations. On this bulldog, you can see there's a hole in this top fin, letting you know it's a shallow model. It's going to run far shallower than a standard dog. You also have pounders. It gets crazy. There's a lot of different baits in this category. Let's start with the pull baits first. Grab the alpha dog here. Big bait is going to take a big setup. I've got my Alexa TW. This thing is a workhorse. It's a Cadillac. It's a nice reel that can pull just about anything. I really like pairing that up with my 9.6 extra heavy shield rod so I can pull any big bait I need to. Before we get into how to work these though, let's look at leaders. When I'm throwing big rubber, 130 pound fluorocarbon leader, big swivel on this guy. You know, I'm not worried about bite-offs as much as I'm worried about break-offs for these expensive big plastic baits. So I want to have a really nice leader on this. The swivel and the fluorocarbon allows this bait to swing. So, you know, as we're getting ready to throw big rubber, you'll notice, got a lot of weight on that guy. Again, the quick reel is going to be important. The typical way to work a big rubber bait, pitch that guy out there. We're going to start straight across our body and sweep across. If you're looking at a clocked face, imagine, you know, for me, 12 to 9, or for a right-handed angler, 12 to 3. I'm reeling, I'm picking up the slack. Reeling, picking up the slack. What that bait is doing is it's lunging forward and falling off. In my opinion, big rubber baits really tend to excel versus other presentations because of the amount of punch that they have in the water. You know, is it a visual thing for muskies, or is it the punch? I think it's a big mass punching through the water, creating tons of vibration that they can't help but come look at. You add in the tail for the visual appeal, that's why they'll hit these things. So pretty much all these presentations, with the exception of the Kraken and a Red October tube, you're going to work with a sweeping method. You can work these by adding in double pops if you like, so you can pull, pop, pop, pull, pop, pop, and get some good action here. I'll show you with the Medusa here real quick. A double stop. And as we get this guy out, throw him across, I'll do that pull, and I'll pop, pop, right? It's advancing less during the retrieve when you're doing the double pop, right? Allows him to hang a little bit and fall off at weird angles. Now, I think the key, more so than anything with a big rubber presentation, is allowing for a little slack line. You'll see what I call power fishing, which is appropriate at times, this, right? We're just hammering on this thing the whole time. That could be effective, but in general, for negative and neutral fish, I want to pull and let a little bit of slack gather. That bait's going to glide forward or pull forward, and it'll fall off at different angles. The harder the fishing, the tougher the bite, the more fall time, the more slack line, hang time I'm going to give these baits. So pull, give him a little bit of a moment there. Pull, he might go left, he might go right. It's going to keep it mixed up while we're working these big rubber baits, okay? I'll hop to this other side here real quick and show you on the hook set. You can get caught off guard on big rubber. We pull here, right? And if we have that slack line fall and he hits here, you're going to need to reel into that fish and come back at him again, right? It seems like more so than often, more often than not, they're gonna hit on that fall. So you need to be prepared. That's why I talked about my Alexa TW. It's a quick reel. So, for example, I'm working this Medusa. We pitch that bad boy out, pull, pull. All that slack goes out of my line real fast and come back and hammer across. Reeling with a bucktail or a glide bait or other baits, the hookup ratio is higher just because of the nature of the bait. When it comes to these soft plastics, that's a lot of bait in a muskie's mouth. You're going to need to be prepared for an extremely hard hook set. Again, high speed reel, extra strength rod. I got the extra heavy shield rod for this application. So if I come here, make the pull, muskie hits, I'm primarily not going to set up, okay? Because that bait is now T-boned in his mouth. And if I set in an upward motion, I don't get as much hook penetration, I don't get as much power transfer to that bait. So, gripping here, side set, right? As hard as I can. boom, hit that fish, and then come up for control. You're gonna get better hookups doing that, period. I'm really big advocate most of the time for taking one of my hooks here. On a bulldog, I'll bury it in the tail. On a Medusa, I'll bury it in the body. When Mr. Muskie comes in and hits this, I want that hook transferring to his mouth as quickly as possible. If that's dangling here, if he hits her here, say this is the mouth, and he hits here, and I pull forward, well, guess what? We're not getting him until the back hook, and he might let go by then. Having that hook buried for those head shots is going to be really important for better muskie hookup with big rubber. Back to the alpha dog. Same thing. Take that hook, put her here. Okay? At times, depending on how fish are hitting, I will tee these hooks out, which is a simple process we'll show you later. Tee the hooks out so it's laying flat against the body. But I want that hook buried in the back, so if I get a tail grabber come in on the fall, because you've got to realize when these baits are falling, when they're moving forward, the hooks are tight to the body. When they're falling, the hooks are in free fall. Mr. Muskie comes in the back and grabs back here. That's how you lose your tails and don't get the fish. Just bury that hook back here, pull the bait down, whoop, in there. Won't affect the action at all. I think more so than anything, anglers that are new to big rubber baits are thinking, am I going to get a hit? Am I going to get hooked up on these things? Have faith, just like any other bait. You're going to need to put the time in to get the bite, but the bites are usually bigger and better with big rubber. So throw this guy out here. Again, side sweep. You can mix this thing up too. Ups, right? Just straight aheads. So you could go side, double taps, hang time, maybe bring them up. And I bring up these methodologies as far as the uplift, or tap rips, if we're working cover and structure that demands that we contour it. So if I'm working a deep edge that's truly deep the entire way, I'm not worried about these upward rips so much. But if I need to work up a reef, I need to work up a weed line, using upward rips to get that thing elevated is going to be pretty important to hook more fish and contact more fish without weed fouling or anything of that nature. Come over here and just mixing it up. We've got the Toothy Tough. This is the Assaultio Triple Tail. Very cool bait here. It's the same process, but what I want to get into here is what differentiates these baits. I'll hop down here real quick and we'll look at these down here. How do I pick the right big rubber bait for the conditions? To me, it's a matter of surface area, okay? So a bulldog tends to have a thinner rear section. The Medusa is wider and flatter, and the Toothy Tough is flatter in the front a little bit and tapers back. If I am looking for maximum hang time around deep or shallow cover, I'm tending to go with a Medusa. The three tails, it's not so much an action thing in my mind, is these are catching water. These are slowing things down, slightly more hang time. If I'm looking for an aggressive Canadian fishing, when I'm up in Canada, I'm fishing the rocks, bulldogs, those are going to be the ticket. This thing tends to hang just a smidgen less. Toothy Tough custom bait tends to be somewhere in the middle. And this is if I'm going for a standard weighting versus standard weighting from each company. Obviously, you can modify these things in innumerable ways. Back to the shallow things. If we're fishing, say, shallow reefs or shallow weeds, obviously your shallow options of all these are going to be important to have on hand to be able to target those fish. But my selection between, say, a bulldog and Medusa is going to be based on hang time, standard models versus standard models, not shallow versus deep. I tend to have more action with the bigger tail baits like the Alpha Dog and the Pounder, bigger baits the further north we go, obviously, and later into the season. Couple things that we can do with these baits, though, if we need to augment what we have on hand. Not everybody has, a pile of baits laying around. Chaos offers weighting kits that slip right onto this guy. There's the Deep Threat. But I also don't mind just using bell sinkers, standard bell sinkers here. You can put them on your split ring on either of these baits if you need to get a bait running deeper to hit your target depths. We move on into tubes. One of my favorite presentations and one of my favorite ways to target muskies that are negative and neutral in the heat of summer are these tubes from Red October. 3 hooks, internal wiring harness with these guys. So there's a great video we did previously where we show you the rigging on these tubes if you need to know how to rig up a tube here. But I would say the one thing that is an important element for your tube fishing is the addition of a big 7/0 split ring. Musky Shop Super Rings will get you where you want to be on this. That opens up the action on these. Slightly different presentation than your other big rubber baits, okay? It's going to entail that we work them in an entirely new way. When I'm throwing big rubber baits, you know, like the Bulldog and like the Medusa, we're talking about the side sweeps. But with these guys, throw them out, and it's going to be a completely upward ordeal. I like to grab the foregrip on this because this can get pretty labor intensive throughout the course of the day. Up, reel in the slack. We're popping this thing up, right? Up, reel to it, up, reel to it, up, reel to it. This bait is going like this throughout the water column. Obviously, the slower you retrieve that, deeper water you can work her down. So we throw him out. It hits, up, reel, right? Get a hold of that foregrip. It's going to make your life easier. I'm trying to keep this rod kind of tight to my forearm to alleviate some of that pressure there. Again, I can't stress the importance enough of a heavy action rod, this extra heavy rod, and a quick pickup reel. I think if you're going to throw big rubber, if you're going to add it to your musky game, you're going to take your musky game to the next level, you minimally 6-3 to 1 if we're getting serious about rubber. Now, rubber and figure eights is a different animal. I'll start with the standard tube here. It breaks all the rules really when it comes to a figure eight. I don't want to bring this tube in, you know, come into this ordeal and have him right at the rod tip, right? Does me little to no good. If I'm working this tube over mid-depth shallow cover and structure, up, in, up, in. When I get close to the boat, what I want to do is I want to leave, what, 9-foot rod, 7-8 feet out. When I get right to that point, I'm going to whip that thing around, right, in my figure eight, keeping it down at depth. If we're targeting deep fish, we don't often want to bring them up shallow. So this allows for a deep figure eight. Jay, I'm sure will cut in. He had an excellent eat on a tube bait here, boat side, and it was probably the best execution I've seen of a tube figure eight. It's a little bit different. You want to leave that extra line out there. Now, we come back to these guys. Back to our alpha dog. My preference with this, when I'm ripping him in, right, I'm working him to depth, come in. With this bait, since I'm not trying to bounce up and down like a tube, I'm going to get pretty much to the leader, and I'm going to use my rod. If you notice, I'm surging this to keep that same action, right? It does us little to no good with big rubber to bring this bait in. You know, we've been jerk baiting it and we bring it on a straight retrieve. Yes, the tail has some action and at times that might work. I like to keep that jerking motion going. If it worked to get him in this close, let's keep it going until he eats it. So bring it in, right to your rod tip. Bring it around, right? Try to keep that rod tip in there. Now, a little ninja trick with these. We get him in the corner. I'll bring him in. Say he's there. Oh, there's the fish, right? We come in hot, hang him out there a bunch. Boom. And you can start adding a little bit more line in, if you will. Something that comes up with boat side muskies and rubber, you have to have a conversation about dead sticking. What is dead sticking? It's pretty much jigging a bait by the boat. So let's say I have a muskie come in on my alpha dog. Oh, he's hot. Okay, where'd he go? He's not. He's back. He's falling deep. Whatever turns these fish off. At times, you're going to want to drop that bait down, right? Click the reel right there. Drop it down. Pop. Drop it down. Pop. Right? A lot of times you'll get just hammered right there. It'll wake you up, I'll tell you. But drop that bait down to the bottom or drop it down a couple feet and pop it up and see what happens. If you have a follower, a lazy follower, a fish that doesn't commit, dead sticking, that's going to work with your Medusas. It's going to work with your tubes, it's going to work with your Krakens, it's going to work with your Bulldogs, it'll work with your Toothy Tough, any rubber bait. Adding that jigging motion is going to get things going for you in the figure eight. I would say that big rubber works any and everywhere that you're fishing for muskies. I don't care about seasonality. Obviously, we don't want to come out in the spring and be throwing an alpha dog or a full-size Medusa, but you know, there's small offerings. Alien eels, a smaller downsize, your standard dogs, your standard small-size Medusas, micro dogs. Rubber can be a really important element to your muskie game throughout the entire course of the year. What's important with rubber is the proper application. Making sure that we're using the right presentations for the cover and structure that we're fishing. Again, I would reiterate, selecting between hang time and fall. Let the fish tell you, do they want Medusas, do they want Bulldogs, is it a rate of fall, is it a hang time thing? But primarily I'm going to implement my big rubber in areas in a gross generality where I'm starting maybe the boat setting in 10 feet or it's setting in 15, I'm throwing to moderately deeper cover and structure. Outside weed edges, rock bars, Canadian reefs are quickly coming to mind of places I want to target with big rubber. So let's say you're on a wonderful lake. We're here in the Northwoods right now, and we have this wonderful shallow cove. You might be more apt to cover that with bucktails, blades, things of that nature. But the deep points, there's deep points here, there's deep holes and pockets. Using probative baits. One thing that you really need to think about rubber is that a probative bait that gets below the level of light penetration where muskies are the majority of the day. Start shallow and work out to mid-depth cover and structure, then working out to deep. That's a great game plan for any angler regardless of presentation and seasonality. Start our day early with blades and topwater. Things slow down or nothing happen. Move to a mid-lake break. Things aren't happening. Take a big dog, add weight to this. Let's work the outside contours of the cover and structure during midday periods and work back in. Rubber in cold fronts, rubber for structure fishing. If you adopt this and you add some of this to your muskie game, it's going to put more and bigger muskies in your net, guaranteed. Glide baits, one of my favorite categories of baits, and they've gotten really cool over the last decade. The glide bait market has exploded with a lot of different options. So let's talk about the differences in glide baits. So, Phantom, can't go wrong there. Hellhounds, pretty much staples of the muskie glide world. You know, you got to have these in your box. They're really utilitarian, kind of inexpensive, and they're going to get the job done. We go up, you've got Lynchums, which are custom glide baits, Shums from Chaos Tackle, and then as well, my personal favorite, wow, Hot Tails. Really cool custom gliders. They do some wonderful work here. So how do you sort of sort through glide baits to find the one that's going to be the most effective? Well, you can see we got some post-frontal stuff going on here, so it's the right time for glide baits. It's high sun, it's nasty conditions. I feel like a lot of anglers misapply glide baits too often. If I need a fast zigzag just subsurface, I might be better off with a surface bait opposed to a glide bait. Using these tools in the most effective manner is going to put more muskies in your net, which is getting them low and slow for negative and neutral fish. So don't try to fish these too fast. If you're fishing glide baits and you're not catching many fish, slow things down, get more finessey. Take advantage of the finesse element of glide baits. Now, what I'm looking for out of a good glide bait is belly roll, right? And that's part and parcel with the slow down. So we need to be giving these baits left, right, pause, and taking advantage of the belly rock, okay? This looks like a weak, injured bait fish that's undulating under the water. It's gonna close the deal for these negative and neutral muskies. So, again, to reiterate the point, if you're not catching the fish of your dreams on gliders, slow them down, take advantage of that belly roll. Now, you don't have to go the custom route for belly roll. Phantoms, definitely these little 6-inch phantoms will probably caught more fish than any other bait. You know, it's a very popular glide bait, very easy to work, but you can be effective with just about anything. I think when we move outside of the early season, post spawn, you need to be looking at your 6-7 inch phantoms, right? They're going to be very effective, and they're pretty versatile. They have screw-in weight systems on these guys. They're going to help you dial them in. Primarily, when it comes to gliders, the worse the conditions are, the smaller you want to go and more finessey. So don't be afraid. Like I said, if it's a moderate cold front or something of that nature, say they were hitting on bulldogs the day before, you can get away with a big glider. It's usually really effective because it has that hang time. But if things get really cruddy, man, break out these little phantoms. A little white one, you know, a little hollow flash hellhound or hell puppy is going to be a really good option for you to get more fish in the net on tough days. You know, just rely on these. Take advantage of them. You might catch hot fish on them, but take advantage of the purpose-driven element of a glide bait for these negative and neutral muskies. When it comes to a setup, you know, back in the day, glide baits were pretty primitive. We started fishing, you know, 6'6" rods, really stiff rods. So, and the guys at the Musky Shop were all fans of the old school reef hogs and some baits of that nature. Pretty difficult to work on modern equipment because they're on a short rod. So, if you're breaking out the old school stuff, it's going to be difficult on this modern equipment. These new school baits, they're going to be phenomenal. Paired up with a 9'6" Musky Shop shield rod. I've got a heavy action rod because it's got a little give in the tip. And I've got a Daiwa Alexa TW. This is an absolute Rolls Royce. It's a Cadillac. It's smooth sailing, and it's great for picking up these baits, especially doing finessey things. It's very easy to use. So, one thing that's intrinsic of glide baits is the need for a wire leader. Now, I have a Musky Shop straight wire leader here. This is a 12-inch model. It's got a swivel and it's got a fast snap on there. The wire leader is going to give these baits more pop. It's going to make them easier to work for you throughout the course of the day. You know, if you're well versed with gliders, you can get away with fluorocarbon. You can get away with multi-strand wire. But if you're getting started, you're trying to up your glider game. Maybe you own a bunch of gliders, but you're not catching the fish you want to catch. Make sure we're strapping on this straight wire leader. It doesn't get much easier than the smaller glide baits, to be honest with you. With modern reels and modern equipment, we really don't even need to snap them per se. We're going to make a cast here real quick. We don't have to snap them with the rod tip like we used to. You can get a pretty good action out of these with small turns of your reel, right? Now, each glide bait is going to require a little bit different pacing, if you will. So some baits will take a quarter turn, some will take a half turn to get them going left to right, okay? So once we have these baits working left to right, we got something that looks good, but don't fall into the habit of these baits coming back to the boat the entire time left to right. Where people are missing the boat on glide baits is they get a really nice cadence, left, right, left, right, left, right. It looks great to you, but to the fish, it's just zooming back and forth. It's not erratic enough for these negative neutral fish. So something to consider as we hit, say, shallow cover structure. Left, right, pause. Let that belly roll happen, right? Pause. Left, right, pause. Allow that bait to hang. If we're fishing for truly negative to neutral muskies, that hang time lingering right over their head is going to get them engaged. Okay, so take advantage of that. If I've got a hot fish coming in on a glide bait, most of the time it's an indication to me that I'm fishing the wrong presentation. You could probably use something else that's going to be a little more effective. If it's really zipping along there, like I said, a surface bait, a Weagle, a post giant jackpot might be applicable for a walk the dog kind of presentation if these fish are coming in hot. If muskies show that they're sort of livening up on small glide baits, at times you might want to break out your fatty minnow or a slammer minnow because it's going to get a similar profile and action in the water. So negative and neutral muskies, like I said, they tend to hang towards the bottom. They want something slower. They want something that's going to give them just a little bit of a time to grab it. When we get into some of these other baits, I'll grab a Warlock here. You know, it's a different kind of presentation, a different profile, big body. What's interesting on Warlocks, they have a tunable tail, so you can get these guys to do some different things here. They'll run shallow, they'll run deeper. But like I said, purpose-driven glide baits, the number one job is contacting negative neutral muskies. You know, I like these Warlocks. They're a little different than your standard glide baits. I like them definitely in the peak season, or as we get later in the season for bigger fish. And with just like all glide baits, let it hang. Hang. Stop doing anything. Hang. Don't make too much of it. Don't get a consistent cadence. We got to mix things up to trigger these fish. Now, how do we select the right glide bait? Like I said earlier, it will boil down to seasonality. It's going to boil down to how negative and neutral fish are. It tends to be the case, like we said, smaller is better the worse the conditions. One thing I will note though is we get cold water conditions. Sometimes these big gliders are the only thing that they'll hit. That's why I like my hot tail. We got a big heavy hot tails here. This breaks the mold for me in some form or fashion, where I might not work this slow, but a heavy glider can be applied as a deep erratic jerk bait that's going to get things going for you. You know, this guy, boom. We want to snap him with the rod because it's going to take some mojo to get this guy running. But now we have a deep erratic jerk bait presentation for cold water fish. It's going to draw up some monsters for you. Now, one thing I would say that's overlooked with glide baits is their ability to contour, cover, and structure. Let's say we're casting a point. If you're diligent and thoughtful in what you're doing, you can taper an entire point. So let's say we need to pattern for negative and neutral fish. Are they deep, shallow, mid, somewhere? If you think about that structure, you can work them down and taper them, tailor the retrieve to work the entire contours of a point. You can work bars. You can work pretty much any kind of covering structure just for some thoughtful casting and thoughtful retrieval by using their sink rate to work around and contour these elements. Again, take advantage of a wire leader and really let that belly roll shine through. I promise you it's going to put bigger and better muskies in your net during tough conditions. Let's talk trolling. Now, if you need a refresher course on the basics of trolling, we did a great video here recently. You will find the link in this video to take you through the stages you need of the basics of trolling. What kind of rod we need for basic trolling, rod holders, line and leaders, things of that nature is covered in that video. So if you need trolling 101, we got you. We're going to take things a step forward and show you how to catch some big muskies trolling. I'm going to start off here with one of my favorite trolling presentations, headlocks and matlocks. Talked about it before. Matlock is a fatter bait. It's got a wider wobble at lower speeds. Headlock is a thinner bodied bait. Still has a fat wobble, but slightly less fat than the matlock. People ask all the time, how do we know what application to use? The answer between a matlock and a headlock is you need to let the muskies tell you. Now, if we've had really aggressive fish, I will strap on a matlock, run it at that 3.5, 4.4 zone. You're going to get very, very, very violent wobbles out of this bait, where this is slightly tighter. So the differentiation between these two baits is going to be the feedback from the muskies, but if you've got really hot fish, you can take advantage of this quote-unquote slower, wider wobble at low speeds and take advantage of the high wobble, the tighter wobble of this guy. So it's not an apples and oranges consideration a lot of times when we're trolling. The same could be said when we get into jakes and grandmas. You know, here's a classic grandma. All of the jakes and the grandmas are thin-bodied baits, right? Grandmas tend to run slightly tighter. You need to let the muskies tell you via feedback from strikes and rips while you're trolling what they really want. So I like to run things in pairs. Now, it depends on where you're at geographically on how many lines you can run. Always check your local regulations to make sure you can run multiple lines. If not, get a buddy or a mannequin in the boat and you're going to be able to run a spread of something to really dial things in. I think that's the nice thing about trolling. If you can run multiple line setups, you can dial in very quickly by running complementary lures. And what I mean by that is, you know, if I'm looking to differentiate between a matlock and a headlock, well, if I can run each, you know, similar size 10-inch headlock, 10-inch matlock, you're going to get the feedback really quickly because you'll be able to tell they're hitting the headlock or the matlock. You can double down on headlocks, you can double down on matlocks. If you're in a state or an area where you can run multiple lines, once you get dialed in, you might have 4 of the same bait, the same color, at the same distance out, and you're just smacking them all day. So take advantage of the multiple presentations available for trolling. One thing I would say though, that with trolling, is that anything's a trolling bait if you apply it correctly. We've got a pounder laying over here. Shortly we're going to show you some applications for trolling pounders. Diving rice, the Titan, my beloved Titan,
trolls great. The wild wobble and the dive and rise action on classic dive and rise baits in the Titan really will put some muskies in the net when nothing else will. We're going to cover that, some jerk trolling stuff, as well as, dare I say, glide bait trolling. So there's some really interesting tactics you can do. We're going to show you the applications of all those. You know, another thing that should be considered, and I think this is missed a lot in the north. When we're thinking trolling, this is a downsized trolling bait up north, right? We're going with an 8-inch grandma, 9-inch jake, whatever it might be. There's a lot of offerings from companies that are on primarily shad-based reservoirs and bodies of water, like BNN Tackle. They make this talon. These downsized bodies do really well up on the tannic water and the clear water in the north as well, because you're able to get a smaller presentation. So just because it's shad-based body, the body style, doesn't mean you have to have shad to downsize to this. Baits like this have got me out of some tough jams during cold front scenarios, so be sure to add some downsized crankbaits to your trolling scenario so you're set up for even the toughest conditions. You know, trolling can be a hot bite, but when nothing else is working, some of these tricks we're about to share will help you put a big muskie in your net. All right, guys, we're gonna dig in deep on some interesting trolling scenarios and applications. First off is an oldie, but a goodie. It's called the Burger King rig. You've probably never heard of this. This is as old school as it gets. Grab yourself a Swim Whiz or a Believer. 8, 10-inch model's gonna do the trick for you, right? First, I'm gonna take the rear hook off. Now, most states, I don't really know of a place where you can have 4 hooks. If you can fish 4 hooks on a singular lure, you don't have to take this off. I'm really sure under most scenarios it's gonna be 3 per. So, what I'm doing is I'm taking that back hook off, right? I'm going to replace the back hook with a 36-inch Musky Shop 130-pound fluorocarbon trolling leader. Split ring pliers. Get them in there. Easy cheesy. Okay, so now we have a Believer or a Swim Whiz, 36-inch leader. What we're gonna do is grab a trusty old school Daredevil spoon. Easy as it comes. Straight out of the pack. Connect that on your snap. Now you have a very interesting presentation. Now this is almost salmon fishing us in some some form. This is going to get a spoon down to just about any depth you want to. Now, spoons have worked for eons, and this is a very erratic presentation, a very different presentation for open water fish. Whether it be, tulip, whitefish, or shad, big flashy silver spoon running at high speeds, really going to be an interesting presentation. We're going to bop over here and show you what this thing looks like running in the water. All right, I got Jim Sturdy's driving the rig here. We're gonna give this Burger King rig a look in the water. Come with me now. I'm running this. Now, I still have a leader for the Believer or the Swim Whiz because it might get hit. We've got a double target out here. So I'm gonna hook this guy up on the shallow setting right now. And we can pretty much base our running depth off of the trolling chart for the Believer and the Swim Whiz you can find on the Musky 360 app. I've got my line counter here, a trusty Akuma 8-foot Musky Shop shield rod. Gonna set this guy out in the water, see if we can't drum up something magical. The magic of that rig is you're able to troll a spoon at a target depth just using that Believer basically as a downrigger, if you will. Great application. Massive thump from the spoon. It's going just ballistic behind this bait. Like I said, reference your trolling charts. You can get a close approximation with this bait. Now you got 2 targets in the water, showing them something they've never seen. Downsized presentation behind a crankbait, and we're gonna hit you with another idea here in a second. All right, guys, you saw the Burger King rig in the water. Let's show you another Offbeat presentation. This is the Livingston Lures Viper, the 8-inch model. This is a really interesting trolling bait. It's gonna walk side to side like a glider. If you've been on a hot glide bait bite, Try this in open water. It's going to do some devastating things for your muskie game. Let's take a look underwater at this B&N Talon Shed. Now this is going to be a great addition to your trolling game, whether you're north or south, to give them a downsized presentation for cold fronts. All right, guys, there's a couple cool ideas for you. Like I said, open water with a Burger King rig or trolling the Viper. Now, I like the Viper in the prop wash. If you can run multiple lines, that's a really neat prop wash bait. A lot of times people get, downtrodden on trolling because they're just maybe not focused on the right areas. So here in a few minutes, we'll cover what kind of cover structure, what we need to be targeting for primarily musky trolling. But to take things to the next level, tough bites. Sometimes, especially cold water pier, Jim has caught, and his brother, you've caught some of the biggest muskies I've ever seen doing rip trolling and jerk trolling, which we're going to show you here in a second. Some offbeat tactics that are going to increase your odds for bigger and better muskies regardless of conditions. Let's talk about a different kind of tactic here. If you're in really bad conditions, sometimes trolling needs to get a little different than running the big motor. We do have a trolling motor on the front, and we're going to use it for a trolling tactic. So Jim Stewart's going to show you some open water jerk trolling and some things here in a moment. But I want to talk about some interesting properties of these baits. This is a Livingston Lures Rachel. It's a neutrally buoyant weight, similar to the Triple D. So either a Triple D or a Livingston Lures Rachel. What I'm going to do is, let's say I've been in a section of water where I see there's bait fish. They're tight to the bottom. They're 15, 16 feet down. There's not a lot of options to target those fish. Deep running crankbaits usually take a little bit of speed, right? Bulldogs to keep them off the bottom from snagging. So essentially we've tried Medusas, bulldogs, maybe vertically jigging over these fish. We couldn't get them to eat. Something a little bit more negative and neutral here. What I'm gonna do is target my depth, just like on a trolling pass. Zero this thing out, and let's say I need to hit 12 feet. Get my line out. I'm gonna utilize my trolling motor to get this bait down to depth. And I'm actually going to use my trolling motor to pulse this over cribs. Right now I'm on a line of cribs. So I'll surge forward with my trolling motor and stop. Triple Ds and Rachels, being neutrally buoyant, creates massive amount of hang time over cover and structure. So as I go over these cribs, advance a little bit, stop. That bait is hanging right over that crib. It's one of the best ways to catch a muskie when I've seen nothing else work. This is a little bit of a different take. From jerk trolling, you can at times add in a good little pop there if you need to. Pop, pop, let it hang over that crib. Pop, pop, let it hang over some deep weeds or deep rocks. Use that trolling motor, advance a little bit. Now we've got a neutrally buoyant a neutrally buoyant bait hanging over cover and structure for super negative and neutral muskies. This little trick is definitely going to put a big muskie in your net. Jim Stewart has caught some of the biggest muskies I've ever seen jerk trolling. You and your brother do this every fall. You've sort of perfected the art of it. What's the deal with jerk trolling, especially these big jerk baits like Suics and Titans and rubber? What's going on with that?
You got to have the right kind of equipment. What it's going to take is a rod, not a long rod. That's a mistake. So get ready for this particular application. If you want to be successful, have about an 8-foot rod, extra heavy. It's got to be pretty stiff. Team her up with a good line counter reel. I got the Dakota here. I like the high gear ratio. You're bringing stuff in fast when you're changing lures and reeling in fish. Put 80 to 100 pound test on there. You're going to want that because you're jerking these things all day, and then get about 130 pound 36 inch Musky Shop fluorocarbon leader. So that's the equipment you're going to take. An 8-foot rod, extra heavy, and primed up with the 80 pound test, good line counter. And then these lures, you're going to be working these big jerk baits all day, and you want a weighted model. The application is to get these things to dive deep, and just whatever application, whatever weeds or structure you're working, get them near that structure or even into that structure if it's rocks. So it's tapping, it's banging. If it's weeds, keep it right in around it, not so you're catching weeds all the day. So you just set your tail here, and the main thing you're going to use to be successful is consistency. You've got to be able to pull it ahead and drop it back all day long. You will have success, almost guarantee it. It's a very productive system. But the thing I find out that doesn't work for people is they get in the boat, they're not consistent. They start doing it, and after about an hour, they get tired, and they're just doing it maybe a foot or two, and they get lazy. They ain't going to catch nothing. I mean, virtually nothing. But if you're consistent and you're working that lure, pull it ahead, drop it back. Pull it ahead, drop it back. A big Suic, a pounder, the toothy tough plastic, the Titan, all those baits will work really good for a jerk trolling. It'll work all year, primarily in the fall, is fantastic. Okay, so one of the things you're going to want to start with when you're jerk trolling is having your drag set properly. Have it so it's pretty snug. If it's too loose, they're going to hit and get off. If it's too tight, they'll hit and snap your line possibly. So then consistency is the next thing. You're going to pull it ahead 2 or 3 feet, drop it back. Pull it ahead 2 or 3 feet, drop it back. If you're consistent, you'll catch fish. And then the next thing you want to do is find the structure. If you're fishing weeds, get your bait running so it's going to maybe tick the top of those weeds or just above them, just run above them. If you're into rocks and wood, particularly rocks are great late in the fall, you know, so it's ticking those rocks or pounding into those rocks, because that's definitely a success way to catch them, pounding those rocks as well. The consistency is the key. Get your bait near the structure, pull it ahead 3 feet, drop her back. Pull her ahead 3 feet, drop her back, and you will be successful.
Bucktails. There's tons of bucktails on the muskie market. We're gonna try to sort through what do I need to throw, when do I need to throw it. I think the most important thing to cover or explain is understanding the different running depths of blades. I'm holding Spanky's 10s here, and this is a classic Mepps Giant Killer. They all fall in this same family, obviously. You look at a blade of this size with a Spanky's bait, there's a lot of surface area here. It's going to create lift in the water. The bigger the blade, the more lift you're going to have. So it's about running depth. If I'm targeting shallow fish, a big flat blade, we come over here, here's the Mepps Musky Flashaboo. Shallow running bucktail. This has thin wire, it has thin blades, but the larger surface area. At the same reeling speed, this bait will run higher in the water column than a giant killer. So the hierarchy of blades, if you will, is all about surface area and lift. The highest running is going to be your Colorado blade. This is a Colorado blade. This is an Indiana blade on your classic Booker tail here. This is going to run slightly ever so deeper than a Colorado blade. We get into, again, the willow leaf blade. This is going to be your deeper running blade. You can find this on, say, Steve's Meat Grinder on spinner baits. It's the rotation and the surface area and how they run. So you're all these blades rotate on all these baits, surface area and lift. That's how we're going to make our selection. We break down to the RJ's little French blade. Okay, so smaller blade, less lift. Now you combine this with weight. What's interesting with Spanky baits, they have heavier wire. It's a heavier bait. So it's all about running depth. That's how I'm selecting blades. That's how I'm going. Should I throw 10s today? Should I throw 8s? Should I throw Indiana, Colorado, willow leaf? The more negative that fish are, the more negative to neutral that fish are, I'm going with willow leaves. It doesn't have to be a giant killer. There's a lot of different people that make a willow leaf spinner bait. Booker has a hair spinner bait, right? So they offer a Booker tail about this size with a willow leaf blade. That's going to be deeper running. You know, your French blade, we just have to sort of differentiate between high, bright sun, dead, flat, calm, positive, negative, neutral conditions on our blade selection. A lot can be said about the blade size and thump as well. Obviously, if I take these two Indianas comparatively to this Mayhem Double 10, it's going to have less thump, less vibration, less profile. If I'm targeting big fish, active fish, I'm going with the 10s. Slightly smaller fish, slightly less active fish, I'm going with the 8s. It's a solid rule of thumb. So smaller blades run deeper, bigger blades run higher in the water column. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the tons of modifications that happen here, where you can take and do a 2-ounce egg sinker on a cowgirl, and it'll be a deep running 10. But I'm talking about off the rack factory baits, where we are dealing with what we got out of the package more so than playing games with them and tweaking them out for different applications. So making that selection. If I have very good conditions, so I'm going, okay, there's an approaching storm and I'm on big fish water and fish have been active, I'm going to go with the 10s. Again, if they're slightly more negative neutral, going with the 8s. If I need to get down there, the Colorado, the Indiana. So that's going to be some general rules of thumb to sort of help you dial in on what you need and where you need to be in the water column, because it's all about getting close to fish. It's all about closing the gap of proximity between you and an actively feeding muskie. I would say this, blades are just about as simple as it comes as far as your retrieve. I'll show you some tricks here in a second, but a good setup is important just to alleviate the strain of throwing these things and making sure that we're able to do it all day long, power fish, and there's no issues. Heavy action Musky Shop 9'6" shield rods, what I'm throwing based on your stature, you might need a 8'6", you might need a 8-footer depending on your height. Something that's gonna create big, wide figure eights. That's the name of the game here. Gonna grab this, I stole this straight off Joe Booker's boat, and we're gonna show you how to run some blades here. All right. Doesn't get much easier, as I said. Turn it out, throw it out, turn handle, muskie on in, right? That's the goal. We want to be able to just sit here and sort of just mindlessly turn the reel. That's all good and well until fish are not hitting. We need to add in some change-ups in this game, right? So first and foremost, an awesome figure eight is a prerequisite for blades. I'll pop over here and we'll show you a nice figure eight. When I'm fishing these bad boys, first thing I'm going to do to alleviate the strain, I'm going to point my rod tip right at that bucktail the entire time, right? As it's coming in and it's coming in, I'm working my rod with that bait. And as I get close to the boat, I'm setting myself up to one side, running straight into the leader, coming in, big wide turn every time. Big wide turns, right? We're creating a depth change here in this corner, cutting across here, going deep and up. I want to ensure that that bait is going into these turns, right? And I'm plunging my rod down and I'm lifting in this corner. So we have created a speed and a directional change and an upward motion. That's why good figure eighters catch a lot of their muskies on that first outside turn. It creates the illusion that that bait fish is evading them and coming towards the surface, and that's what's going to trigger more strikes for you with bucktails. Now, out on the cast, make the pitch, you know, get the blades going, we turn the handle, we hope all is well. There's a trick here where at times, if you gun that reel, right, turn the handle, gun the reel, add in some speed bursts, it's going to help you out in the big picture here, where we don't want this plain Jane retrieve. We don't want this plotty, I'm reeling at one speed the entire time, right? So again, make your pitch, turn the handle, and every now and again, burst, speed burst, right? Mix it up. If you got a fish behind you and that thing guns away a little bit, he's probably gonna make a move on you. When it comes to properly fishing these things, like we said, it's as simple as it gets, but there's some tricks to get more out of these baits. Let's say it's summer and I'm on negative and neutral fish, right? At times it's going to be imperative to have blades that run really well at low and slow speeds. When it comes to slow rolling, it comes to slow applications with, say, eights. I love these musky marabou or flashaboos. It's a great slow rolling bucktail. You can see, I'll get Jay on this shot here. As I come around with this bait, I'm advancing very slowly, right? Very slow advancement with that. Giving off a ton of thump while progressively, you know, just plodding through this. That's a great trick over shallow cabbage, negative and neutral fish. Say if storm's gone through the day before, you know they're still shallow, but we can't get them deep. Taking these things, pitching them out, slow rolling blades. So I'll make a selection sometimes for my different bucktails on how slow I can roll these things. Can I get a slower retrieve out of these MEPs than, say, another brand? Absolutely, right? So we're going to look at these blades is not the same. They're not all the same from the sense of an 8 is an 8, a willow is a willow. We want to sort of find what's the best quality of these. And I think the best quality of the musky flashaboos and their marabou models is their ability to slow roll. So if I need to tackle, again, that shallow cabbage, I need to tackle a shallow rocky point, but I don't want a high speed retreat. Skirt materials, another thing to consider here. we have Flashaboo, and we have hair, and we have some silicone bucktails. Profile, right? So everyone has a booker tail. If you don't get one, it's a perennial favorite here. But you have marabou and Flashaboo. Flashaboo is a wider profile, a larger profile in a lot of sense. When we get these little deer hair bodies wet, it's a small target. So if you have, say, like the 700 blade paired with a small hair body, that's really creating a big thump with a small profile, which is great for, you know, sometimes we're downsizing or we're fishing pressured waters, is a unique little trait there. So if we're making a selection of different elements there, or different skirt material on what's going to be the most effective. I'll hop down here real quick and break out the box here and just sort of talk about these things a little more in depth. Because a blade's a blade at the end of the day, right? But understanding the devil's in the details, in reality, of two blades here that can't be further apart. These are both double tins. This is a Shumway Giant Flasher, and this is a RJ's tins. Obviously, gigantic marabou body, and here's this little hair body. We have the same blades, but they couldn't run any differently. The RJ's is weight forward, so it's a heavier bait, small body, so this is not creating a tremendous amount of lift in the water. Where we come to a Shumway Giant Flasher, this is basically a topwater bait. You know, this bait lands out here, and you've got a bait that is very buoyant because of that marabou. I'll show you real quick here. It's like throwing an entire small rabbit into the lake, but you know, you throw this guy out there, even slow rolling this guy, it's coming in really high in the water column, right? So that skirt material is going to really change the dynamic of this double tin bait. You know, I'm going pretty slow and he's running pretty high. Okay? So, shallower applications, marabou. We come over to this guy, this RJ's, and this has caught some fish here. Relatively the same, again, the same surface area of the blade. Heavier bucktail. And just at the same speed, this guy's running deeper by 2 feet. You know, it's the same reeling speed, and he's getting down there and getting low. Right? So it's important that we not only differentiate between styles of blades, but we also differentiate between the skirt material and how that's going to affect the running depth of these things. I would say, more so than anything, that Flashaboo's king now. In the past, you know, in years past, it was all about hair, it was all about tails and different fur on things. But this is going to be your standard. They're non-absorbent, and they're going to increase your running depth opposed to your hair. But you can really get some mileage out of those marabou and Flashaboo. Making an intelligent decision in your blade selection is going to boil down to these factors: running depth, and how it correlates to speed. So I need a slow, deep blade presentation, right? We need to make an intelligent decision. Is that intelligent decision going to be a willow leaf blade, or is it going to be a heavy-weighted bucktail like a RJ's to get it down where the muskies are? At times we're going to need power fishing. We're going to need double tins. We're going to need fast. We don't want to try to necessarily power fish a heavy-weighted bucktail that doesn't have a little bit of fluff to the skirt, or it just has hair. So it boils down to running depth, and it boils down to what your profile needs to be. And like I said, when we come to the skirting materials, these deer hair, these squirrel tail bodies, that's a small profile. You can get big thump with a small profile. You can obviously go all the way like we had to the Shumway and have this gigantic profile with a big thump. So making that intelligent decision, again, slow and low with your French blades, slow and low with your willow leaf blades, and sort of calibrate your musky bucktail game based upon application, application, application. Low and slow, or is it high and fast in the water column? It doesn't get much more exciting than Topwater. You know, it doesn't happen all the time, but when conditions are right, especially, you know, early season, summer, and then the early fall, you can really get in some nice fish with topwater. As far as setups, I like my 9.6 Musky Shop shield rod. It's heavy action. It's going to have enough backbone to set the hook. Leaders, I'll tell you, I want to have a barrel swivel. I have a straight wire leader on this guy right now. That's helpful for your walk the dog baits like your Suic Weagle, as well as your Poe's Giant Jackpot and other walk the dogs. Musky Safari offers a really nice walk the dog bait. So a straight wire leader will help that on your topwater setup. But have a nice barrel swivel to prevent rollover of your tail prop baits. Now, it doesn't get much more simple than throw it out, turn the handle, a la bucktails. That's why everyone loves topwater. You can't go wrong, but there's some finer points and some different presentations in this bait category that go overlooked. One thing I would point out is baits like the creeper and the rattle hog. These are some really interesting presentations. This is the bit and tackle creeper, and this is a rattle hog from Hog Seekers. Sort of forgotten in some capacity that creepers catch big fish. I love throwing these things in Canada over the reefs early in the summer, and when we get into cold water, creepers can do some neat things. I'll show you some tricks here in a second. And then the rattle hog is a very unique lipped topwater bait that has sort of a tail smacker blade here that's going to do some neat things. I'll show you here in a second, but it really boils down to walk the dog and tail prop. Here's a gigantic Cannonball Junior from Lake X and a pretty well used Poe's Giant Jackpot that's got some teeth marks in her. But we'll show you what's going on with this. When it comes to topwaters, a lot of people think about just burning them, right? You think about speed. We've got to trigger a strike. But I think it's often overlooked when we get these downsized topwaters that a slower gear ratio reel is pretty important, right? These are going to roll over with your high-speed reels. You want to creep these. You want to slow roll some of these little bees and some of these presentations over shallow cover early in the season. So having maybe a 5-3-1 for a topwater setup for downsized presentations. Musky Shop sells Zara Spook, some of the old school walk the dogs that are great for closing the deal. Say you have a topwater follow on a big Poe's Giant Jackpot or something of that nature, or you want to throw the Whopper Plopper, the small sizes, slow reel. It's going to prevent the rollover, and you want to have the right setup. When it comes to throwing these guys, again, doesn't get much easier. Throw it out. Turn the handle. Plop, 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 boom, is what we're going for, right? Now, tactically, what I want to do is I want to mix it up in some shape or form, just like our bucktails. Don't get too steady Eddie with this. A couple little surges here and now and again are going to help you seal the deal. Now, personally, I always figure eight my tail props just like a blade, right? I want to drive that bait underwater. So one retrieve here, throw it out. We're throwing it some cabbage right now. You'll notice I innately did it. I raise my rod angle when I'm throwing a topwater tail prop. If you have a down rod angle, you're just jamming in the water. Too high and you're going to miss the hook set. I like to be sort of level, chest level here, and pointed right at the bait, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm getting in closer here. I had a little mix up here, try to close the deal. Come in, lead that bait down, drive it subsurface. Tactically what I'm looking for is to get that fish's head turned downward, okay? When he's following in, if I've got a topwater follow, here, I don't want him staring at me. I don't want him looking at the boat, if you will, right? So I'm bringing this guy in, a couple little surges, little mop, pop, bye, get it going. Rod tip down to try to lead him downward before he comes in boat side and take that fish's head down. Just do it like your typical bucktail retrieval. This can be applied to, wait for the sound of the boat. We want to apply these same things, whether it's a Booker or a Lake X here. You know, I got a fat bee on, pointing my rod at that bait, and as I'm bringing it in, bring that rod angle down. add something in there, mix it up, surge it a little bit there in the last little bit. Downward, figure 8, we're good to go. Pretty simple with the tail prop, guys. Things get interesting when we start talking about walk the dog baits. Let's find a walk the dog we like. Let me grab this guy. So with walk the dog bait, you're limited as to what you can do both sides. So throw him out, and let's talk about working these things, right? Hits the water, what we're going to do is get this thing going left and right, just like our glide baits. When I'm working top waters, I'm not going to point my rod at this walk the dog bait. With these longer rods, I'm going to cock it off to the side at a down angle, right? And get that bait going left to right. Now what I'll notice is this, not reeling. And I'm able to get that bait to walk, okay? When you see a retrieve, let me get this going for you. My reeling hand is simply picking up the slack line as it's generated from this bait working it. So I get the bait going, right? Pick up a little slack. Pick up a little slack. Pick up a little slack. Keep your hand under control. Your reeling hand needs to be in check to work these properly, okay? Don't sit here and do this. You're gonna end up with a bait that's coming in straight. It's gonna be really jutty. So I wanna work this bait out here. Make the pitch, walk it, walk it, walk it, walk it. One thing you'll hear is about getting these things to bounce in their own wake in some capacity. It's kind of magical, especially if you have a following fish. So with a top water bait, walk the dog, I'll get that bait going, and I will do the same thing here with just the slightest taps, right? Not working the reel, sort of like when I was doing the reel demo there for you. I want to get that guy out on a bomb cast. Say I'm throwing a reef in Canada. Boom, get it out. I'm working that bait, and I will just bob him in place a few times to mix up that retrieve. So just like when we're working a glide bait, we don't want that bait to just be boring. So I'm hopping him in place, walking in his own wake. He's barely advancing. That's gonna contact some big fish. It's a monster fish secret up in Canada. It's a monster fish secret later in the year when we get in that shallow water bite. Just tap him. Take your hand out of the equation, right? You don't have to hold it up, but I'm doing it for example. I'll just do this, tap, 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 tap. Get him bouncing in place. You're gonna connect with some big fish. Now, walk the dog baits. We're slightly limited, as I mentioned, boat side. If I've made a really good cast and I'm getting sort of this 20, 25 feet off the boat, I'm going to try to bounce him in place right there to contact a fish. I might give him a hard rip or mix things up. When I'm 10 feet off the boat, it's really hard to catch a fish on walk the dog. So I will set myself up for kind of a herky-jerky subsurface figure eight. So when I'm at 10 feet off the boat, take that rod tip and jam that guy down and walk him back and forth, okay? I will rip, jerk, anything I can do to get that fish convinced to eat it. It's usually not pretty on a walk the dog bait subsurface, but just keep something going. I've seen this happen numerous times with these baits. They're coming in. I get in that last little bit. If you got the patience of Job, sit here and just let that bait sit 10 feet off the boat. If you've seen a fish behind that bait and you haven't closed the deal yet, we're working him in. Bait's coming in and he hasn't eaten it yet. You just go stop. Make him look at it, and the next time you get to rip that bait, boom, he's gonna surge on it. If you're having trouble converting following fish with these baits, try that big pause right there 10 feet off the boat. Let it hang in his face, pick it back up, and then go to that herky-jerky motion under the water. With all things top water, and it's classic, most people have heard it, don't set the hook until you feel the weight of the fish. You want to feel that fish's weight. You want to feel the rod load up. It is so difficult at times to control ourselves from setting the hook when we see a big blow up or we see a falling fish and that mouth opens. I've joked about it on the 360 podcast with my good friend Jay, who's working camera right now. I've had some monsters come in on Canada on top water. and I shut my eyes. You know, it's kind of goofy to do, but all of us, no matter how many times I see a great topwater blow up, I think I've missed more fish because I react too quickly. You gotta slow yourself down. You gotta be patient. Shut your eyes if he's scaring you. Close them tight and wait to feel that thing. Don't react to the sound of the fish. Don't react to the visual of the fish. React to the feeling of the fish on your rod once you feel the weight of him. What's neat with these baits, I'm gonna grab this creeper real quick. The action on these is so unique that I really feel it stands out from obviously all other topwater baits, but it really pulls some fish in that are negative and neutral and weird position. With creepers, one thing I'll note, I will sort of have my rod slightly higher, and as their name conveys, don't work them too fast. Get them in there. It's gonna go pop, 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 right? Let them pause maybe every now and again. And you'll hear it, it's just little drops, and it's kind of finesse-y, I guess, if you will. And when it comes to a topwater, it's a different animal. Now with these boat side, basically you got a little bat spinning in circles, subsurface. There's not a lot you can do there. It's just the nature of the beast. But I've converted a couple fish over the years, not too many terribly, over the years on creepers boat side. Now the same thing applies, I think, with a creeper as say a jackpot or a weagle. That if you're getting follows and you get the movers on them, just let that bait set that 10 feet area off the boat. You know, with creepers, what I like to do with these is work them over shallow vegetation, especially in peak summer months. You know, if I know I moved a big fish and it's tight in cabbage and we're getting to a sundown situation or a major and minor, pitch that bad boy in there. You know, hey, he wouldn't move on our blades when we came back, or he wouldn't move on anything else. Just entice him with this bait, nice and slow. Work it over that stuff, really quote unquote creep it over top of shallow cover and structure, and you're gonna get blown up on. One thing I'll say is this, I have seen fish though hit these baits moving pretty quick. So you can sort of find the top area where these baits will rock, and it turns into a pretty wild little retrieve there. You know, it's noted before, there's a lot of variety in topwater. I'll grab the hog seeker here real quick. Pretty cool bait. This is the rattle hog, and it's got some sound in it. It's got a little flippy tail and a metal lip. Talk about erratic presentation. Bomber out here. Let you see what this thing looks like. This bait is walking like a minnow while slapping its tail and creating a pretty large wake behind it. It's pretty interesting in the water. What I like about this bait for topwater presentations is because it has the lip, I can do a crankbait style figure 8 with it. So let's say, you know, I'm moving some fish, but they're reluctant. Make my pitch with my rattle hog, kind of moderate rod angle, just like you're working a tail prop, right? Get it going. That thing's smacking. It's making a lot of commotion on the surface. It's almost got a pop to it like a tail prop. Then I'm going to take my rod tip and go down, and now I've got a boat side crankbait. Okay, so if you're having problems converting fish, they just want topwater, they won't look at your blades, really neat option there, something to mix it up. But you know, to wrap it up on topwater, it's as fun as it gets. We all want a big muskie on topwater, but it really boils down to application. Can't stress it enough. Early in the morning, late in the evening, and in the cover of darkness is when you're gonna run topwater. You see these baits, you come into the Musky Shop, you see something like the Cannonball Jr. Monstrous bait, or we have the Cannonball. Sometimes these are Night Stalker baits. You can throw a big bait in the cover of darkness and pull these summer muskies up. So focus on your topwater early in the morning, late in the evening. If you're cruising it for a muskie at night, it can be really effective. There's nothing more fun than topwater, and the Musky Shop has the best selection in the business. Dive and rise baits. If you know me, you know they're my favorite. We got a Titan here, we got a Suic. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks with both of these baits. You know, Suic's classic bait. Some of the biggest muskies I've ever seen caught in my life have come on Suics over the years. If you get a Suic from the Musky Shop, you're going to have to tune this guy. So I'll show you a couple things real quick. This tail here in the back, we're going to have to bend this guy. that is going to adjust how deeply this bait is diving, okay? It's going to take some tweaking. So let's say that you want a shallow version. We might bend it up if we need to get a little bit deeper. And there's kind of a point on this bait where if you bend too much, it's going to go shallow again. So we got to tweak that. Don't be afraid to grab yourself a pair of pliers. You can bend the corners of these things to get them to do a little bit more erratic action here, and you're going to have to take some time tweaking the guy. The nose of this bait is screw in. It's a screw into straight cedar wood. At times, to get to run the way you have to, or you want to, you're going to have to go counter to the way that it's running incorrectly. So if it's running too hard to the right, turn it to the left. Too far to the left, run it to the right, and just tweak this. It takes a little bit of patience to get these guys going, especially when I'm going old school with the suic. It's a classic bait. I do like a straight wire leader on that bait to give it a little bit more snap, and I highly recommend a split ring on this guy. So casting these, it couldn't be anything easier. Let's see how well I got her tuned up here. I'll tweak her just a smidge. Now, if you want to make small tweaks, by the way, I use a split ring on here. You can kind of leverage that front hook hanger there if you need to with your finger. So with the suic, take her, pitch her out, sideways rips across your body, right? Now with these big 9'6" rods, you're going to find that you can't go old school here, right? And I always wanted to go old school. Growing up fishing these baits, 6'6", 7-foot Premier St. Croix rods were sort of the ticket, a short, stiff rod. You've got to come across your body and get this guy to angle to get him to do what you want to do. It's going to be a little bit of adjustment if you're fishing old school. So if you're adopting new rods, but you're fishing, you know, older style baits, if you will, you need to adjust with the side sweep there. But take some time and like I said, tweak this guy out to a purpose-driven level of what you're trying to achieve there. Make sure you're tuning this nose. Like I said, split ring's going to save you a lot of trouble there in the long run. Now, there's not really a wrong way to fish a suic or a Titan or any other dive and rise bait. You know, I also like the Kodiak Navin from Chaos Tackle. It's a great bait. We're applying these generally in shallow and mid-depth cover. You know, in the summer month, that's going to be tobacco cabbage, milfoil. We're going to try to get these baits to impact this cover and then float back. I'll show you real quick. Just grabbing a Titan here. Be on the new screw. Now with Titans, you don't have to adjust anything. It's going to self-tune each cast. But I'm going to throw up here. Got a little wind here. I apologize. We got some shallow tobacco cabbage up here. I'm going to target that shallow cabbage. And just for you guys that don't know, the Titan has adjustable weighting system. This is in the shallow mode, so it's going to run right over the top of this. You can do side little taps with this. Just the tiniest little tap's going to send that bait diving, jerking around there. So I'm going to taper this covering structure. So I'm using small taps now. And as I work out deeper, I'm going to drive the Titan a little deeper into the cabbage. And as I get further away, a little bit deeper. Let that bait go down, rise, down, rise, down, rise. It's very erratic for fish to look at this thing that's bopping in their face. They sort of can't stand it, especially in a negative neutral state or a tough state if they're buried in cabbage. It's a classic Canadian scenario that we have muskies buried in deep cabbage, high bright sun, dead flat calm scenario where they don't want to come out and play. So we're gonna have to hammer those baits in there. Take your Titan straight across the body. Now with this 9'6" rod, I'm running a heavy action rod. Again, I'm running this Daiwa Lexa. Now this is the 7-1 version of the Lexa TW. Now it's got a really fast line pickup. So if I want to fish dive and rise baits really quickly, I don't mind that quick reel. It allows me to catch up to that bait before it comes all the way to the surface. So up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down in a really tight manner. Something that's often overlooked in tight quarter scenarios with dive and rise baits, whether it be a suic, a Titan, a Navin, whatever, a Hot Tails. Anything ever Hot Tails makes a heck of a nice dive and rise bait as well. Is getting that sucker down and letting him come up almost all the way to the surface. So a counter to that would be let it go down, come up where it's just tickling the surface of the water, down, tickling the top. Boom, and slowing things down, if you will, but with a fast rate of rise. So now we have a bait that's going down fast, coming up fast, but not advancing very much if we're trying to pull muskies out of the cabbage. One thing I would note to advance your odds with dive and rise baits is we got to have a good setup on a figure eight. You know, we have to have a game plan boat size for dive and rise. So if they're not on blades and they're not on rubber and they're not on crankbaits and they're not on gliders and they're on dive and rise, they're a little bit finicky. Now sometimes they're hot, but you know, we're gonna plan for finicky fish. With the Titan, running one now with the mid-depth weight in it, I'm gonna get that bait down, snaps, let it rise a little bit, snaps, let it rise a little bit, snap, let it rise. As I work the Titan back to the boat, I'm thinking about setting myself up in the same fashion you would set up a classic minnow bait retrieve back to the boat, right? So 3/4 of the bait, or excuse me, 3/4 of retrieve back. The last 10 feet, I'm going to a straight retrieve and doing a crankbait style figure eight. Now the Titan, with its nose pin, has a wander. So it's gonna wander and it's gonna vibrate like a crankbait in the figure eight. So you have a crankbait style figure eight opposed to jerk baiting. So I'll show you some jerk baiting figure eights here, but this allows us to just get a standard crankbait figure eight going here, where these fish are going to see that tail and that body rocking. So we've transitioned from dive and rise to crankbait figure eighting, and it's going to help you convert more of these follows, especially if they're lazy or a hot fish. I've seen it in the past working dive and rise baits. I got a fish that's too hot. If you see a fish that comes in on a Titan that's looking really hot and he's raging, you can straight crank that thing and get some things going. So with a classic suic, regardless of size, we're gonna have to be a little bit more considerate of what we're doing here boat side. So let's say the last little third of the cast, I've worked the bait in, he's coming in. I'm gonna have to bring this bait in and jerk bait this back and forth, right? You're gonna have to add jerks and pops with this bait down low. I've seen a lot of guys swish these baits back and forth, right? I have seen people bang, right? And I didn't even do that well. So I've seen guys rock these back and forth to entice muskies that followed. You're gonna have to use some of your glide bait technique, some of your boat side maneuvers that you're really undulating this bait for a hot fish, right? One thing I'll say, the advantage versus the older style rods, the short rods we started with back in the day, with these dive and rise baits, with wooden dive and rise baits, you can take advantage of the rod length to keep that bait at depth. Okay, so if I'm fishing a suic, I will just jam him down. It might be out of the camera shot for Jay, but I'm gonna use the whole rod length here to get something going, something disruptive, okay? So the rod's adding depth because these baits wanna float up. So you're just gonna have to jerk bait him around there. One thing that is interesting with dive and rise is its early season applications and cast back applications. So when it comes to cast back, I love the Titan Junior as a cast back bait. Let's say we had a hot follow on blades and he sort of just went, nah, I'm not into it there at the end. This little dive and rise bait is gonna do wonders for you. What I like to do, find a fish that followed, pop this guy back and just work him hot, right? Work that bait hot, and you're gonna be amazed by how many fish pick up on that dive and rise bait, that downsized bait. So, you know, you can follow up, say you move a nice muskie on a Titan, you can have a Titan Junior as a cast back, or say you move one on blades, again, cast back. Something that's often overlooked is the ability of a dive and rise bait to be an awesome follow-up for a topwater follow. A lot of people just go, if they follow the topwater, I'm just gonna go blades. Now blades are an entirely different thump than a topwater. So let's say we have a follow on a walk the dog style topwater lure. We can come over here and I'll make a cast over here. So if he walked, you know, if you got him on the walk the dog going and he didn't hit it, a really fast unweighted dive and rise bait just subsurface, right? Change your rod angle with the Titan, it's just gonna run right up into the surface, and it's got some really strange action there that gets them enticed if you're sort of working in a parallel manner to the water surface. So topwater follows, unweighted Titan, Do it with side sweeps and just work it right under the water. You can breach the surface of the water, but this is going to give you a different element, right, to your dive and rise fishing, using them as a follow-up for topwater follows. Guys, dive and rise is hands down my favorite category of baits in the musky fishing world. You got to add this into your game. Get confident with Titan, Suics, and all the other great dive and rise baits, fishing them shallow. But one thing I'll say before we go on this, don't be afraid to fish these guys deep. Add weight kits to these baits. You're gonna be amazed how many fish you'll pull up late in the year if you can get these things down 5-6 feet, tickle the top of rocks, tickle the weeds. It's gonna put a big muskie in your net.
Hey everybody, I'm Jim Stewart from the Musky Shop. Thank you very much for watching Next Level Musky Fishing. Please let us know if we can be of service to you, as it would be our honor to serve you. And God bless and good fishing.